Welcome to another edition of Living Legacies. I'm Tom Morrow, your host, and today we have with us Lynn Gardner, longtime resident of Oceanside and a community activist and a general man about town, so to speak. Welcome, Lynn, for the coming in and talking here. And you have been in Oceanside since about '82, that sort of thing.
That's correct.
Yeah, '82. But you were born in Los Angeles?
Yes.
And that was home for
a number of years.
Yeah. Okay. You went to school out in the San Gabriel Valley for a while.
Yes, I had an acquaintance that lives here in Oceanside that she identified the school by name because we'd gone there, and it was out among the cow pastures, Rosemary Jones.
Well, you and Rosemary went to school at Roosevelt. Was that where it was in San Gabriel?
That's correct.
Now, tell us how you first ran into Rosemary and decided that the two of you knew each other.
Well, we were talking one time because she and I both were on a Humane Society. She was my secretary, I was the chairman. And we were talking how the kids dressed going to school today. And so it was very interesting. I said, I'll show you a picture when I went to kindergarten. And I had a tie and a white shirt on.
Now this is the
shoes.
Picture.
That's the picture.
Yeah.
And
you're the second one from the right in this picture. Yeah.
Well, from where I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I understand.
Anyway,
and you've got the tie on.
Yeah, we were one of these cowboy plays that they were putting on, and that's how we got our picture taken. But it was an interesting time of my life because my best friend, Dad, owned a dairy, which was on the way to school. And there were times when we'd have cow flop fights. Mm-hmm. If you're not familiar with that, anybody with a dairy or has cattle are familiar with a cow flop fight. Mm-hmm. But he turned out to be my best friend and through school until my folks moved back into Los Angeles, close to my father's work.
Now you, when did you move back to Los Angeles?
Well, I would say probably about 1930, and was closer to my father's business, and we moved out on the west side of Los Angeles.
Tell me about what your dad did.
My father was in the sheet metal business, and he taught sheet metal at Frank Wiggins Trade School, and also had his own business. And I got acquainted with that because I have fond remembrances of playing around the shop. But then he got me to do the cleanup work and things like that. But I was learning a trade that I liked. It was strictly projected drafting, where you would lay it out on a piece of metal and make it up into whatever you wanted instead of on a piece of paper.
So you were learning this as you were going through school then?
Yes.
Now you had mentioned earlier that to me that you had worked with your grandfather, who was a plumber, and learned that end of it.
Yes,
a little bit.
I was asked to leave the L.A. schools at one time, and I went up to a little town called Hanford, and then from there I went down to a small town called Wasco, which my grandfather was the city plumber. Mm-hmm. And this was during the Depression, Tom, and
you were lucky to have a job.
Helper.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're lucky to have a job.
Well, he couldn't afford to hire anybody because there was no money around. Uh-huh. And when we would do a job, so a lot of times we would get either chickens or eggs or produce out of the field of people because there was no money around.
But you were getting a valuable education.
Oh, yes. I learned how to cut and thread pipe and all kinds of things.
Now, you went to high school at Dorsey High School in Los Angeles, and as I know the story, that was a fairly new high school at that time.
Yes, it was. I think the first graduating class out of there was 1939. So we were the first full-term group to graduate, or students to graduate from Dorsey High School. And
the reason why I know that is a fellow that I had on this show not too long ago, Jerry Stapp, who was a couple of years behind you.
He brought up the rear.
Yeah.
Jerry was a very good friend of mine here, too. But,
yeah. Well, now, this is a picture of you in your football uniform at Dorsey. What year was this? Were you a sophomore, junior?
That was when I was on varsity. That would have been in the fall of 1940. An interesting thing, those uniforms, because there was no money for uniforms that year when I played football, were hand-downs from Manual Arts High School. And we got their jerseys and their pants and whatever else you needed, because Manual had money and they got new ones and we got the old ones. But that's interesting.
Now, what position did you play?
I played right tackle, and I played for the fun because the coach one time said, if you'd stop laughing, you'd play first string all the time. But I had more fun playing football, roughing it up.
Well, now, your bride, Lois, did you, the two of you, were you an item in high school? Did you know each other in high school, or?
Oh, yes.
High school sweethearts.
I got acquainted with her. They had a hot spell one time, and I told my mother on a Friday, I said, Mom, I'm going to ditch school. It's so damn hot at school. I'm going to go down to the beach. And I went down to the beach, and there was this good-looking girl went by, and she had a blue bathing suit on. I should have framed the picture. But I got acquainted with her, and in later years, we dated regularly, and turned out that she's my bride today.
Well, good. All right. Now, were you still in high school when you joined the Naval Reserve in 1940?
Yes, I was, Tom. When I was in junior high school, I had a very good friend that was a Korean boy, a fellow named Robert Kim. And he told me at that time, this was back probably in the late 30s, he said, the United States will have a war with Japan. It's coming, because they're already over on the mainland. And I took him seriously, and I had been a commercial fisherman and up around Morro Bay, and I loved the ocean, and my dad used to take me out to visit the Navy ships when they'd have open house on the weekend. So I got acquainted with a chap that was in the Naval Reserve, and I went down and joined up. My brother and I both did, in May the 1st of 1940. And my first cruise was on an old four-stack destroyer that I was in a fire room for 1 week and the engine room for the next week. We went up to the World's Fair in San Francisco. And I just loved being around that equipment, that big machinery that made the thing go. And I came back and I started my senior year of high school, and in October of 1940 they had a national emergency and called all the reserves to active duty. And so I went to my executive officer and I said, I'm in my senior year of high school. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, could I get a discharge out of the Naval Reserve? He said, oh, sure. I said, what's the repercussions? He said, well, you can go down and sign up for the draft the next day. And I said, my mother didn't raise me to sleep in the dirt. I'll stay where I am. So I stayed in the Naval Reserve.
Well, now you were able to go and take classes. You were basically stationed in the same area, though, down San Pedro. And,
yes.
And so you were able to graduate with your class in,
oh, yes.
in 1941?
I went to night school up in San Pedro High School, and that was after I got my work and my watch is done. And so when I got my credits, I went back to high school and graduated with my class in summer of 41. And Lois and I walked down the aisle together. I think that was one of the highlights of my graduation.
That's great. Now when did the two of you get married?
Well, I went in active duty, and I went to welding school, and then I was on a small work boat I was a qualified diver on there. And we transferred down, and we were in Pango Pango for 6 months. And I did salvage diving there. And over the period of time, I recovered about 5 airplanes out of Pango Pango Harbor. And the ship went from there out toward Guadalcanal. And then I was transferred because of my rate was too much for the complement of the ship. I was in New Caledonia, and then one day there was a ship come in there that was being converted. It was a troop transport. And they wanted a rate that I had, a shipfitter first class. So a buddy of mine, we went and volunteered and got on the USS Wharton. And I was on that from 43 up until the end of the war. And we were in 7 invasions, and I crossed the Pacific 9 times on that.
Let's go back to some of the diving work that you did. You were telling me what you were doing, and I think that some of the younger viewers especially would be interested in knowing what kind of work were you doing on the...
Well,
when you were diving, I'm a little bit behind with my pictures here. This is your picture of you when you
joined the Navy.
Joined the Navy in 1940.
That's right.
Good looking, Cuss.
Well, I always felt that way myself.
And this is you in a deep sea diving uniform, and this is what you over in Pango Pango.
No, this was taken in San Pedro.
But I mean, this is where you did
I did diving in San Pedro. They had a degaussing range that was off the breakwater, and we went out and brought that up because they used to run ships back and forth through the degaussing range to demagnetize them. And the Japanese had torpedoed a couple of ships right off of San Pedro, and they wanted that range brought inside. So that was in 70 feet of water.
Explain why a degaussing range. What that entails. What that means.
Well, when a ship sails, it generates a magnetic field around itself, and there were certain types of torpedoes and explosives that would react to a magnetic field. Well, they would go back and forth through this and demagnetize themselves, and then they would go out. They could go on their way because electrically it had no effect on a magnetic detonator of some type, which I was not too familiar with.
Yeah.
And then when the ship went to Pango Pango, my job was being the diver. I would set moorings because we put anti-torpedo nets out there, and there in Apia, also in Western Samoa. And my job was to go down and set these things. And the only problem we had is with coral snakes, because you'd work barehanded, and they would come around to see who you were and what you were, and they'd like to wrap around your finger or something and get a wrinkle because they have a very small head. And that was the only problem we had. Sharks didn't bother us at all. They didn't like us.
Yeah, it's easy to say now.
Yeah. But I did diving, and then I requalified in Tulagi. The Wharton came in there, and I went over on the Chestnuts and requalified.
Where did you dive? You were saying a lot of the carrier aircraft would come in wheels up, and you'd have to go down and retrieve them as deep as 140 feet.
Yeah. Usually they were little Grumman fighters, Wildcats. You couldn't crank the wheels down for them to land at the airfield, so they would dump them in the bay, and that was a navigational hazard. So my job was to go down and get them. But the pilot, I had to be ready to dive to the bottom in case the pilot couldn't get out, to endeavor to get him out of the plane. Because they said if you can get him out in 15 minutes, we can save him. And but I was fully dressed, and I could drop down 140 feet.
Did you ever have to?
I never did have to do that, but the airplanes, we would put a cable around where the propeller was, then lift them right out and put them on the ship I was on.
Were they able to salvage them?
Oh shit, yes. They take them back out and
fly them again, huh?
Salvage what they could out of it.
Now this is a picture of the USS Horton, which is for those who don't know what an AP is in the Navy, this is a troop transport.
That's correct.
And
she was built on the East Coast in 1922 and launched, and it was the Southern Cross that used to run down to South America with passengers. And when I went on it, we went into the cabins and tore the things apart, and I said, what are you going to do with all this trash? They said, well, when the sun goes down, we'll throw it overboard. And we left New Caledonia, and the first night out, we probably threw 4 or 5 truckloads of wood overboard. And then we went to New Zealand, and from New Zealand we went back to, first port was San Diego, and then we went to San Francisco.
Now this picture of you playing MC, well, we got actually 4 pictures here, but you were carrying, of course, Marines.
Oh yes, there's a few on that ship.
Yeah, and how many would you get on that ship?
Well, we'd carry it, and I never could figure why they break it down, but there'd be 4,000 troops and 500 officers. I never could figure why they separated them all, because it didn't make any difference to me. But we'd have 5,000 Marines, and they all had a bunk. They all got 3 meals a day, a place to sleep, and we would. The longest trip was 19 days that they'd be before we'd sight land. And this was crossing the international date line on the equator the same day.
Yeah, there's always quite
Tuesday, and the next day was Thanksgiving Day of 1944. And it was my pleasure to be asked by the captain to be the MC on her.
Well, for our non-nautical friends, this is a big deal. When you cross the international date line or the equator, but you crossed them both the same day.
Yes.
So these guys got doubly drubbed.
And the captain said, "You can do anything you want, but just don't injure anybody." And so the Gold Braid got the coffee ground and gingerbread cake that we made, and they got their face washed with an old swab and dumped in our tank that we had. But it was all in fun. But I was peg leg, and when it was over, I thought the program was all over. I was going to go down and get rid of the peg I had on my leg. But some of the ones that I had issued damages to chased me around and caught me and threw me in the tank. And it was in fun. I had a lot of fun doing it.
So how long were you over in the South Pacific?
Well, the ship would come back, and usually we would be in for maybe 2 to 3 weeks, where we would have some repairs done and take on more stores and then load up and go back out. But most of our time was spent in the South Pacific.
Your rate was a ship fitter, right?
Yeah.
And first class, what would a ship fitter do on
you were
on
the
a Navy
plumber,
ship?
the metalsmith, you do any kind of hull repairs.
Anything to do dealing with metal.
Anything that was with metal.
So what you grew up learning really paid off in the Navy.
That's correct. It was exactly what I was in, and we fired the airplane, the guns on the ship one time, and we broke some of our fire mains. Well, those were 6-inch pipe, and to fix those, we had to do a lot of cutting and fitting and get stuff put back together again, because it's very important to have fire mains that work. And but we would go into we were in 7 invasions while I was on the Wharton.
What were some of the invasions?
Oh, Eniwetok, Kwajalein, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, and Okinawa. We were up there, and some of the other smaller ones. And our ship would convert to a hospital ship when we would unload all of the troops. Then we'd start bringing casualties back aboard. And I volunteered to work in the surgeries with the doctors, not being of any medical. I told them, I said, if the toilet's plugged up, I'll tell you what to do with it, but I'll be glad to do anything. And I worked next to some of the finest doctors in the world. Our senior doctor was Herbert Anderson of Los Angeles. I think he's still alive. And I volunteered to do anything. I don't care if it was hustling bedpans or assisting doctors. But one of the jobs we did do, if they needed a brace like an arm brace, I'd get one of my fellows from the shipfitter shop, and I'd make a little drawing of it. I'd say, go back to the shop, make this up, and bring it back to me, and I want it right now. They'd go back and bend it up and weld it up and bring it down to the operating room, because they could put a fellow's arm up like this with a brace all the way out and get a chance for his arm to heal. So it's interesting.
What was the most interesting or the oddest thing you made when you were in the Navy? Because I know that ship fitters made everything.
Well,
and if it didn't move, they painted it gray, right?
Well, that's right. That's why I didn't stay in the deck gang, because I hate to paint.
Yeah.
But we made some very interesting things on board ship. They, particularly when I was working on during the invasions, and also the anybody that had casualties or any problem on there. I worked do anything we had. I remember one time that the fellow in the Gedunk shop, which is the ice cream area, he wanted some shelves put in. So I went in to measure them with 2 of my fellows. And the ice cream machine was there, so I filled a cup of ice cream over here and give it to them, and I fixed myself one. And this fellow come up and says, "You can't do that." I said, "What do you mean? I can't have that ice cream?" He says, "No, you can't have ice cream. You have to pay for it." So I took the 3 cups and threw them in the trash can. So I went back up to the shop, and about a week later, this guy said, "Oh, when am I going to get my shelves?" I said, "I don't have an order for any shelves for you." So finally it dawned on him, you better put a little out there, a little more D as it's called today, and I'll get your shelves. So the next time I went through, he says, "Tell your fellows to come in and measure them again." And next time he had great big cups of ice cream for us, and he got the shelves.
Well, you know, I was down at the naval base, and I asked a young seaman where the Gedunk was, and had no clue what I was talking about. It's where the snack bar is. That's a Gedunk, right. And a Comshaw is where you obtain things, usually without a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
Well,
it was a great education for me, and I've been rubbed elbows with some of the finest people in the world when I was on board ship.
The war's over. You go back take over your dad's business. This is a picture of you about 1946, 47.
Yes.
And that's you in the center?
Yes.
And who are the other two fellows?
They're one of the workers in the shop.
Okay. And what was the business called? What was the name?
Commercial Sheet Metal Works.
Would people from Los Angeles, would they know that name? Or
some of the people would. We had some very, very good accounts. One of them was American Can Company. We did all of their work. Mm-hmm. And we were on call. Like if they had a breakdown, they could call my dad or my brother or I. We'd get a crew down to help them out.
Now, you and your brother ran this business. You retired what year?
1982.
And that's the year you came to Oceanside.
Yeah.
Okay. The business is still in the family. Your brother's son is
running it, and it's still going. They have some of the biggest equipment west of the Mississippi River there. And we started out putting gutters on houses, and we wound up making molds for railroad cars.
Oh, God, that's great. Well, let's talk about Oceanside. Now, you moved to Oceanside. You became a member of the Rotary Club. You are in the chamber. You are a Rotarian. You've done about everything there is to volunteer for in Oceanside.
Just about.
Pretty well known. In fact, I think my first year with the Old Blade Citizen back in '91 or '92, you and Lois were named Citizens of the Year.
That's correct.
For Oceanside.
That's right.
What did you get that award for? I mean,
well, we have done a lot of volunteer work, both of us. And when we take a job on, our whole thought is to get it done properly, make a success out of whatever we take on. And she and I have worked in various things. We have been chairman of the Marine Birthday Receptions to Mission, I think, for 3 or 4 years, and we've passed it on to new hands.
She volunteers here as a receptionist at KOCT.
Yeah, that's what keeps it running on Monday morning.
That's right.
That's right.
Sandy. And I think she's over at the Welcome Center.
Yes, and she does 2 days a week at Tried and True Shop, which is women's resources.
And of course, you make sure everything, you go around town making sure everything's running all right.
I make sure she has a job every afternoon. But in volunteering at the Tried and True Shop, I put up all the racks for the clothing to hang on there. I'd get the stuff made, and I'd go down and put it all in. And that was up my alley at doing things like that. I have been a member of the Humane Society since I came here, when Mel Smith was very active.
And I know you sell flags. Yes. How did you get into that business?
Well, I wanted a flag one 4th of July, and I couldn't find anybody in town. And I like to buy my things right here in Oceanside.
Yeah.
So I called around, and nobody would sell them to me wholesale. I finally found a fellow in San Diego that was quite interested in having an outlet up here, and he said, I'll put you on a wholesale basis. And so I started working with him. And he passed away after a few years, and his daughter took the business over. I have a perfect coordination between the two of us. And right now, the flag business has gone bananas.
That is booming. Well, I know I appreciate very much the fact that you furnished our flags, the Union Jack and Old Glory for Winston and FDR. We're out of time, Lynn, and I appreciate you coming in and sharing your life with us. I know we've got a lot more to talk about, but I hope that this has given folks at home a little bit of an idea of just what a great community asset that you are. Thank you very much.
It's a privilege for me to be asked, Tom.
Okay, thank you. I'm Tom Morrow, and this has been Living Legacies here on KOCT with Lynn Gardner. Tune in again next time for another edition of Living Legacies.
Possible through the generous underwriting grants of Hatter Williams and Purdy Insurance Services of Oceanside, providing North County with complete insurance needs for more than half a century. The TriQuest Corporation, providing quality office and manufacturing space in Oceanside. And the North County Times, serving all of North County with complete local daily news coverage and internet services.